And good evening, good afternoon, and good morning to everyone out there in the world. Pleasure to be here. I'm also joined with Keela Diman, who is going to join us in our really exciting discussion today on the future of proteins. It's a in what we're calling the clearly the shifting demand dynamics, and obviously what is the role of alternative proteins in light of this these changing dynamics. We're going to be talking about a lot of different topics today, you know, uh, but let's set the stage first. As one key point that we want to deliver in our presentation in our discussion today is that right now protein systems overall, whether it's animal based, plant based, or other sources, we're at an inflection point. Obviously, the rising cost of inputs, the increased volatility of supply chains, obviously the environmental and climate pressures that have been ongoing for years, if not decades, and also not just increasing but changing regulatory scrutiny, causing a lot of volatility, is creating a lot of challenges, specifically for traditional and conventional animal protein production and consequently the growth. Uh, but at the same time, a lot of the alternative protein ingredients and products and solutions that we're seeing in the market face these same increasing costs, in same problems with supply chain challenges. And on top of that, continued uncertainty related to consumer acceptance, and even slower than expected commercialization of certain types of plant-based or alternative protein solutions. So obviously, and that is on top of continuous innovation, moving beyond plant-based and animal-based proteins into ferments to and uh, other sources that we'll talk about that are emerging, whether it's cultivated meat, but probably more importantly, microbial based proteins. And we'll get more into that as well. So these are all stirring in our minds, and we wanted to get on this discussion and and show the world the type of work we've been doing. I mean, we're doing a lot of really important work for major organizations, both NGOs and private and government related, on this topic, because protein is the foundation of human life. And increasingly, more and more people are realizing that, you know, getting guaranteed and reliable sources of these of protein nutrients is increasingly costly and problematic, especially if our primary sources are from traditional sources, and trying to expand that globally with some degree of equity. And we'll touch on a lot of these points in our discussion. Obviously, a lot of it's physiological. Unlike carbs and fats, we it's an essential nutrient. We have to eat proteins in order to not just get the energy, but more importantly, a lot of the other additional functional benefits that proteins provide. And not all, and we'll get to this in a bit, but not all proteins are the same as well. And not all proteins are important for certain users based on their lifestyle, based on their age, based on their health states, and also even access, driven by limited income budgets or just being far from reliable sources, has made the quality and quantity of the diet, or rather delivering on a high quality and quantity diet for all participants in the world, is increasingly becoming more challenging. So, okay, but a lot of us on the call, and even me back in the olden days, used to think like, okay, protein is, basically just the muscle meat, or milk, dairies, there's not a, dairy, or, protein's a protein, right? No, not really. Actually, as we do more research at Frost and Sullivan, we're uncovering and discovering that the uh, it goes well beyond meat and dairy. Obviously, the nature and the types of proteins that we need specifically goes well beyond just satisfying our nutritional requirements and building our muscles. It's the and a lot of our work is related to not just supplying, but helping companies find substitutes for some of these other functional proteins, including the collagens and the elastins, which are potentially important in plant-based, or I'm sorry, personal care or um, cosmetic applications, home hair care, and that's what I meant to say, hair care, not home care. But then also obviously all the various enzymes and peptides and antibodies and toxins that could be in turn used for medicinal purposes or for enhanced nutritional applications. Um, Even the so and there's a lot of specialty proteins out there that we it's an essential nutrient, but it's hard to get through alternative sources, and we'll hit on those points too. All of when you have limitations on access to certain types of proteins, and we're talking beyond meat and dairy. We're talking about the hemoglobins and the very specific insulin and the growth hormones that a lot of times we get through our diets and you know access to new foods and beverages that delivers on that is increasingly challenging, and a lot of sources of proteins from some alternative sources don't supply that, so they're imperfect substitutes, which has been a driver of why there may have been limitations on commercialization in some plant-based protein categories. So last year, we at Frost and Sullivan had built a large global, what we call it's a nutritional database. So we have a fairly good idea of, like, given all the food that is going through all the food systems, both supply and demand and trade, by weight, all the various commodities that we eat across the world, independent of what country, because we looked at over 180 countries. We we quantified the implied nutrient composition of the food that we are producing and consuming, and then in turn we forecasted that through 2050. Why did we do that? Well, we need to understand what the actual requirement is for proteins, and so that way organizations, leaders, governments, NGOs in the future can better understand what that potential gap is as populations grow over time, as uh, at the country level or specifically. And what we did here, what this chart we're showing here is in 2050, 2.5 billion tons of protein equivalent food demand. So that's how much protein that we need to produce in order to satisfy total unit shipment consumption across all countries. We actually and it's not just total proteins. I mean, we actually broke this down into. We looked at the scientific literature. We looked at scientific databases, some at USDA, some with among with EFSA. So we looked at government sites, but also scientific studies to help us get an understanding of the breakdown of the various types of proteins found in all of the various commodities that we consume across humans, with a special focus, of course, on high meat and high protein based products, which deliver the most types of proteins. And you can see here, this is an interesting chart. Maybe most of you guys have probably never seen anything like this. So please, this is a implied share of the types of proteins that we all eat together at the very aggregate, and what in terms of the types of proteins that we get through both traditional and non-traditional or alternative sources. Myosin and actin, those are your muscle fibers. The caseins are all the milk-based proteins. We have plant globulins, which relative to all the other, so this is really important. This chart shows us the essentiality of animal-based type proteins to deliver on the protein demand that we're seeing. And despite, obviously we have a little bit of egg and we have other proteins where there's very specialized plant-based proteins, but in general, most of the plant globulins, your basic plant proteins, it's still a relatively small share of what consume humans overall are getting their primary protein sources from. So very interesting chart, and it kind of shows us that it may not be as easy to displace and replace directly the myosin, the actin, and the caseins, the egg-based proteins with alternative sources directly. So and that learning is actually kind of similar to the type of feedback we've been getting from the industry, both from brand owners all the way back up to the ingredient producers who are saying like, I think we've kind of reached a maximum on like trying to turn our plant-based proteins into meat analogs, because we're missing that piece. We're kind of missing we're not able to jump from a plant-based myosin to animal-based myosin with, and that at a cost-effective manner that's going to be attractive for consumers. And on top of that, obviously there's the whole difference in the target markets. Another thing we get from this, obviously, is when you dig deeper into the protein ingredients market, especially when you get into milk-based proteins, we start to see in certain formulas and formulations of foods and beverages that we eat. And now I'm getting more into the specialized processed or specialty nutrition products. Obviously, milk and meat or plant or yeast or bacteria, whatever that source may be, these are going to be the primary sources for all of these various protein nutrients that are needed to produce optimal and perfect formulas. So obviously I come back to dairy. We've done a lot of work over the years, many, many years in milk-based proteins. I would say that's one of our foundations, and really getting understanding of how big these markets are, and how they're growing in certain applications. Most importantly, the traditional market being infant nutrition, the new growth opportunities is more on sports or elder, adult nutrition types of products, weight management products, maybe that one's not as attractive, but clearly they all use the same base, milk powder, milk protein, casein, whey of concentrates and isolates. And those are easy to get. Actually, those are quite easy to get in high volume. And we know that because we have the complete breakdown of all the various types of milks by species as well. So that way we have a better understanding of what is being directly consumed. So, and why is this important? Well, in the prior slide I shared here, we have also done it for human milk because that is the need where, we have to understand what the humans are needing and consuming. And obviously this human milk is one type of food that's necessary. And what infant formula manufacturers try to produce from. A big, obviously you can see here, what I like, take a step back and see like this big block of protein. There's and a lot of carbohydrates, a lot of fats, and this is your traditional nutritional composition for human milk. We have lactoferrin and alpha lactobulins, and those are really important. You can see that in terms of importance, it's a fairly large box relative to the total formulation. So that's kind of, you get a sense on like the relative importance of this nutrient in the primary product. But obviously infant nutrition manufacturers have to rely on reliable sources to get not just the total ingredients. They can get plenty of carbohydrates and proteins and fats from bovine milk, which is the traditional source, which is the current source of all the infant powders. But you can see here that it's lactoferrin is very, very rare. And that is a big gap in a lot of nutrition. This is a necessary protein for immunity. And it has other health benefits for consumption for babies. And having that missing, which is missing from a lot of formulas. If you go and look at the infant nutrition, ingredient information of your standard infant formula product, standard, not the premium products, those are the ones that do have lactoferrin sometimes. But lactoferrin is not common. In fact, we're just now trying to get HMOs into scale in human milk, which is very rare as well. And HMOs, while it's not a protein, it is a type of carbohydrate, human milk oleosaccharide, but this is the business model that could be potentially, and what I mean is like the source of HMO here is not from cows, it is from bacteria, it's from ferments. And and that is where we're able to mass produce the necessary human milk oleosaccharides to make infant nutrition products more like the real thing. And there's still a lot of growth there. And that's kind of where a lot of our work has been on the advisory side, is supporting our clients in identifying specific types of critical nutrients that will real, high value, low volume type of plays. Another area I wanted to touch on this part, even though we've been talking about human nutrition this whole time. And in fact, when I turn it over to Akila soon, we'll present some of our future work on proteins for human nutrition. However, to you've seen in the prior chart, that's human nutrition. That's the source of all the proteins that humans are directly consuming. However, and let me just bounce back. I know you probably don't like going back and forth, but just to reference this chart again, this is a lot of meat and a lot of dairy because it's through human consumption. It's not indirect. However, we do need a lot of soybeans to feed the animals, to get the eggs, to get the poultry meat, to get the bovine, the milks and the dairies. Not just soy protein, but plant-based protein and more generally, to get the essential proteins that we need. Obviously, this is a very dynamic space right now, depending on where you are in the world. This is a hot market or not hot market, and that's really the cool thing about our model too, is that we do have a special section where we specifically look at the requirements of animal nutrition. So we have the same breakdown of the protein requirements by animal, and that can be used by nutritionists for developing their own feed compound formulas, etc. But obviously, soy protein is an area where there's a lot of people in the world that either A, have too much, so that's a good thing, so that'll lower the cost of feed in that region. There's other areas of the world where they have access to soy, but maybe they don't want the soy because it's creating dependencies on crops that they can't produce locally. So that builds dependencies on other countries and other regions of the world that could create unintended consequences for the country that's importing the soybeans, or vice versa. As we see here in the United States, you get dependent on one or a few markets for soy and you lose those markets, then you end up with silos that's filled to the top, and full inventories is not a good thing. So obviously that's the supply chain volatility that we're experiencing. And obviously if you're trying to loosen your dependency in some parts of the world, you're going to have to get something else, because this is a very highly commoditized and highly nutritious product for animals, especially when fortified with synthetic amino acids. However, it also, and it also has, depending on where you grow in the world, it could have some positive or neutral effects on the environment. Maybe water use and land transformation use, however, is another issue that you would need to take into account depending on how you grow it. So obviously, soy or any crop that depends on land and raw material inputs, those are all cost drivers, and that's going to make meat access, dairy access harder, especially for a lot of parts of the world. So, what a lot of the discussions we've been having recently has been, because we're having this kind of mix of trends, Some clear winners, some clear losers, but kind of it all rhymes, meaning that one way or the other, soy or protein, not soy, but all proteins in general, it is critical for life, and it is to many governments a nutrition security question. So guaranteeing reliable and sustainable and healthy sources, indirectly or directly, of protein is going to be critical for well, enhancing the quality of life for individuals within a given country. Um, Obviously, climate change and the circular economy are also really critically important trends that maybe are not as top of mind given a lot of the other trends that our clients are facing right now, but it's still in the background and it's still there. Consumers, customers, especially younger customers, expect this as a default. Having food and food sources that at least recognize how much GHGs are being produced, how much water is being used, how much land is being used, how much waste is being valorized or just thrown out. Because that's going to, it's going to create social resilience and economic resilience. If you do address all of these critical points. There's one ingredient that keeps popping up though, that kind of helps us guarantee all of these areas because we see on one hand, if we're too dependent on milk, we may miss a nutrient. Or if we're too dependent on soy or plant-based, for one, we may miss functionally critical proteins. But also, what are we going to feed our chickens and cows? What are we going to feed them? And if we do feed them, that means we're just going to be importing their food instead of just importing food directly. And we have a lot of clients all in certain parts of the world that are thinking that way, saying like, we have to create a more reliable source. And single cell proteins is that answer in many respects. So, real quick summary of what this stuff is. It really depends on who you ask, but most of this is going to be yeast based or bacteria based meal. It's simply you create biomass through fermentation, whether yeast or bacteria, and then you process that and you fractionate it into its primary macronutrients. You take the water out, you take the sugars out or the carbohydrates, and then you take the lipids out. What you're left is concentrated protein, just like plants. Same process, essentially, just a different input. But creating these colonies, this biomass is really where the IP is. And so obviously yeast has been around a long time. We've been growing and using yeast for millennias, couples, either indirectly or directly consuming that. But in recent years, there's been a lot of higher interest in creating, identifying certain yeast types or bacteria types that are compatible with innovative or unique or interesting input and feedstocks. So instead of feeding bacteria or yeast sugar directly from sugarcane or high fructose corn syrup, let's create a process of feeding it directly methane, hydrocarbons, and ammonia to provide the nitrogen and the other basic chemicals. And through that process, create the ferments and the colonies we need for further processing, which can then turn into compound feed. That's kind of the areas that we've been working closely with a lot of important clients throughout the world, is helping companies better understand the economics of this process and understanding how big this opportunity is. From my standpoint, I think single cell proteins have been around 100 years. If you do the scientific research, this has been known. Obviously, you can process microbials if you concentrate enough, but more specifically, the technology of taking novel feedstock like petroleum or basic chemicals, and through that process create colonies of the bacteria or specialized yeast, which then can, that's been around for a while. Um, Interesting, I won't go into too much detail. Maybe during Q&A we can go deeper on that topic. But the idea, of course, is, you know, if if you get the chemistry right and you get the process right, there are opportunities for some countries, some organizations, some sectors of the world where there can be some self-sufficiency potentially, or a lot closer, which is that is the theme of 2026, folks. Is growing self-sufficiency, and building those capabilities, and building in those redundancies, so that way we can produce all the milk we need, produce all the eggs we need, and produce all the meat we need for the future. This is going to be covered in a very exciting growth opportunity analytics report that's going to be authored by my colleague Akila Diman, who will take this conversation forward and talk a little bit more about some of the topics that we'll be addressing in our report forthcoming. Akila?
Yeah. So yeah, thank you, Chris, for laying out such a comprehensive foundation, especially, around the role of single cell protein and, the opportunities emerging across the low medium income countries. So before we move further, let us look at the full protein ecosystem. So at Frost and Sullivan, we have been tracking the proteins industry for some time now. And so at one end, we have, whole plant foods like legumes, grains, and seeds, which, are familiar, affordable, and sustainable, but they are naturally limited in protein concentration and functionality for modern food applications. So to overcome this, plant protein ingredients emerged. Now their growth is being driven by improving processing technologies, rising demand for affordable protein, and a strong nutritional profile. But despite the scale, plant protein still face challenges around taste, digestibilities, and also performance. So, if plant proteins cannot fully match animal proteins, what's the alternative? Animal proteins still continue to deliver the best nutrition and functionality, yet their environmental impact and cost volatility and supply risk raise an important question, that can we really produce high quality protein without relying on animals? Uh, Alongside these, obviously, cultivated meat and insect protein represent additional alternative pathways, but they currently face challenges related to, higher cost or adoption barrier. And this is where, fermentation-based proteins come in. Chris already explained about microbial fermentation that use microorganisms like yeast or fungi directly as a protein source, which offering efficient and scalable production, and also offering strong sustainability advantages. But can fermentation also, deliver specific proteins with the same functionality as animal-derived ones? So precision fermentation does exactly that by programming microbes to produce targeted proteins like whey, casein, egg protein, etc., without uh, animals. So coming out of protein ecosystem, please, can you please change the slide? Yeah. So coming out of the protein ecosystem we just discussed, the natural question here arises is that, which of these pathway is capital actually backing today? So when we look at the investment landscape, fermentation clearly stands out. The sector has been entering a phase of strong capital concentration driven by growing confidence from both public as well as private investors. In fact, according to the GFI 2024 stats, the fermentation technologies attracted over, $200 million in public funding in 2024. Now, this is an important signal. right? Because public funding often, de-risk technologies and unlock larger pool of private capitals. And as a result, both biomass as well as precision fermentation are increasingly viewed as scalable, lower risk platform compared to other alternative protein pathways. And so you can also see here that I have listed down, few of the largest fermentation deals of 2024, which included, Métis $100 billion Series C, Perfect Day, and so on. Meanwhile, the cultivated meat sector also continues to attract comparatively less funding, reflecting ongoing challenges around cost and scale, while plant-based proteins see more moderate investments. So overall, this shift in the capital, it tells us something important, that investors are not just betting on the alternative proteins broadly, but they are specifically backing the fermentation as a core technology platform for the future of protein. Um, Next slide. Okay, so after seeing where the investment is flowing, the next logical question, is what does that capital translate into in terms of market opportunity? So the slide here shows why precision fermentation based ingredients are now entering a scale up phase. If you see in the food and beverages application alone, the global precision fermentation market is currently a $1.1 billion industry and is uh, uh, reflecting a strong double-digit growth trajectory. So now this growth is being driven by several factors. First, there is a growing focus on sustainable and environmentally friendly ingredients. Then the second would be, rapid advances in synthetic biology and genetic engineering, that are improving yield and lowering cost. And the third would be, rising demand for functional and nutritionally customized ingredients, particularly in the dairy alternative space. You know, so when we break down this market by ingredient type, proteins clearly dominate today, accounting for majority of the revenue. And within the proteins, not all ingredients are, growing at same pace. Among them, whey protein isolate is the most mature precision fermentation segment, with companies like Perfect Day commercializing it since 2020. And then Nestle is also using fermentation derived whey for one of their brands called Orgain protein powder. And over the years, multiple partnerships have existed. However, the traditional whey extraction from milk still dominates the market overwhelmingly. Then casein is also one of the segment that has been regarded as one of the high growth segments, with companies like New Culture, which have received GRAS approval. However, the commercial availability is still limited. uh, Casein is basically the key protein responsible for cheese structure, the melt, the stretch, firmness, and mouthfeel. So traditional plant protein cannot simply replicate these properties effectively. So that's where precision fermentation comes, because it enables the production of bioidentical dairy casein without using cows, and and can produce cheese with the same performance but potentially lower environmental impact. And as consumer demand for high quality dairy alternative grows, especially in cheese, which is one of the hardest category to replicate, casein is becoming strategically important. Now, in case of lactoferrin, it is not a bulk protein, right? It's a bioactive functional ingredient which supports, immune health, iron absorption, gut health, and is widely used in specialized applications like for infant formula, medical nutrition. And the main challenge here is that natural lactoferrin occurs in a very small quantities in milk, making it expensive and supply constrained. So precision fermentation solves this by producing this lactoferrin at high purity and potentially more stable supply, which is very attractive to high value nutrition markets. Like lactoferrin, even ovalbumin, which is egg protein, also benefits from high functionality and relatively low inclusion rates, and it represents moderate growth in the future. Okay. Okay, so at the same time, it is also important to understand about, and be realistic about, the constraints in this market, and one of the most being the high capital expenditure, building or accessing food grade fermentation infrastructure, bioreactors, downstream processing system, etc. It requires substantial investments, so making it difficult for any new entrant to compete without strong financial backing or partnership. Along with this, I think fermentation processes, especially the downstream processing, they rely on feedstock such as refined sugar. So the sector seeks lower footprint alternatives such as agriculture residues, waste streams, gas as a feedstock instead of refined crops. Water use for microbial fermentation has been flagged as another obstacle, and one of the major barriers I feel is, here is regulatory complexity. Approval for novel ingredient vary by region and processes, like EFSA or FDA. Evaluation can be lengthy, expensive, and uncertain. Finally, I think there is also the challenge of market access and trust. Selling into B2B food ingredient space demand robust supply chain, reliability, scaling proof, and customer confidence in safety and performance. So I think taken together, this slide mostly highlights that precision fermentation is no longer a niche innovation. It is becoming a commercially meaningful ingredient platform with clear growth pockets and defined challenges that will determine who scales successfully. Can we move to the next slide? Yeah. So now that we have established that precision fermentation is real and scalable market opportunity, the next question is like, what are the broader trends that are actually shaping how this market will evolve? At a bigger level, environmental pressure is one of the strongest drivers. Um, Food systems are facing real limits around emission, land use, water use, and precision fermentation directly addresses this constraint by producing ingredients, in fact, all the ingredients, including proteins, much more efficiently than the traditional animal farming, which is why it's gaining serious attention from both industry as well as policymakers. At the same time, it is also important that who the consumers are really. Like millennials and Gen Zs are far more open to try new food technologies, and you know they 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 move towards the sustainability led solutions. So uh, so their willingness to try next generation protein is also helping precision fermentation move out of a niche space uh, into more mainstream application. Another major shift is happening behind the scenes, that is digital tools, AI, synthetic biology, all are coming together to dramatically improve how proteins are designed and produced. This is making development of ingredient faster, fermentation processes more efficient, and scaling up far less risky than it used to be earlier. We are also seeing much stronger capital and partnership momentum than before, which I already mentioned in the earlier slide. Um, if we zoom a bit more, the focus of precision fermentation is expanding. Like it is not no longer just about dairy proteins. Companies are developing, egg protein, meat enhancers, specialty fats, and even sweeteners, which open up opportunities across the food, nutrition, and functional ingredients. And at the application level, we are seeing that these ingredients are being are being incorporated in health focus areas like sports nutrition, medical nutrition, and products that are designed for specific life stages where performance, consistency, and quality are very important. And finally, from the operational standpoint, the industry is moving more towards the regional and modular production models. The models which improve supply chain resilience and make this precision fermentation process easier to scale in a cost-effective way. Um, yeah. Chris, can we move to the next slide? Yeah, so now that we have explored the broader trends shaping the protein landscape, it is important to shift the conversation towards that where tangible growth opportunities are emerging. I think one of the most compelling growth opportunity in the alternative protein space is, the emergence of hybrid protein solutions. A hybrid protein solution, they combine, animal, plant, or fermented derived protein. And, why I say this is because, hybrid products, they allow companies to reduce cost, improve nutritional profiles, and make new protein options more appealing to the mainstream consumer. Like they and they also help overcome challenges such as taste, texture, and price gaps that sometimes limit adoption of fully plant-based or fermentation-derived proteins, mostly fermentation-derived proteins. I, because in the price-sensitive markets like India and some parts of Asia, Latin America, hybrid formats are especially relevant because affordability is the key. And I think that hybrids will be the major bridge category helping mainstream audiences transition towards a more diversified protein system. Another growth opportunity that should be included is, I think, the need for cost optimized fermentation derived protein, but not in large and bulk markets. So instead of trying to compete directly with commodity proteins like soy or whey, the smarter strategy is to focus on high value specialty nutrition segment, just such as infant formula, medical nutrition, elderly nutrition, uh, in fact, even sports nutrition. So in these categories, companies don't need massive volumes because inclusion rates are low, but margins are really high. So customers are not just paying for the protein content; they are paying for the functionality, purity, safety, and consistency. And this is where the precision fermentation has a clear advantage. Um, from the regional perspective, North America and Europe lead in terms of innovation, but Asia Pacific offers the largest long-term growth potential, driven by strong demand for infant nutrition in China and, growing health awareness across Southeast Asia, Japan, South Korea. So, by targeting this premium application first, companies can achieve profitability faster. They can strengthen their manufacturing process and gradually reduce cost, creating a more sustainable path to long-term scale. And the last one would be in application diversification, and it lies outside of human food entirely. It's for the feed and pet nutrition. So these markets are massive, stable, and far more flexible in terms of ingredient acceptance. Um, Both fermentation derived protein, microbial biomass, and novel plant proteins can all be used to formulate high quality and feed ingredients for aquaculture, poultry, and even specialized pet formulation. So what make this pathway attractive is that it can absorb large volumes of alternative proteins quickly, creating the economies of scale that the human food sector desperately needs. And as more as more producers, enter this space, we are going to see a significant acceleration in capacity utilization, cost reduction, and production learning curves. Yeah, so I think that's all from my end. I will hand it over to Chris now to
Well,
just,
thank you.
sharing his concluding thoughts on the topic.
Well, yeah, but I guess before we get into Q&A, I thank you, Akila. Yeah, as Akila said, I mean, there's a lot of interesting opportunities. These are really important ones that we've identified, but obviously, this is a very complex space. And the more actionable opportunities, will require, yeah, there's a lot of dynamics, a lot of trends in this space, and it kind of takes a really good understanding of the not just the basic trends, but really the core possibilities of some of these ingredients, and really trying to think outside the box more to produce more actionable opportunities for our clients. I do feel like the winds have shifted a bit in terms of what we mean by alternative proteins. I've when we did this study many years ago when I was a program manager, and we did a alternative plant protein report, and the trends were quite different back then. And it was really driven on a different set of dynamics in the marketplace. And what's fascinating is that I've had time to see these trends shift over time, which is good because when you're observing these trends over time and seeing what it was and how it will evolve again, it really opens up, it kind of gives you confidence that, what, the world is going to be quite different, even more so in the future. So the more innovative, the more novel our solution is, it's like it may very well be a leader in the future. And that's one of our goals at Frost Sullivan, is that try to help our clients not just identify opportunities, but turn them into actionable, commercialized success stories. So happy. I'm really happy to. I'm really thankful for Akila for her presentation, and I'm appreciative of everyone on this call. I know we have a few questions in our chat. Maybe, Akila, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you real quick.
Yeah.
You're going back to the scope slide here, and one thing that kind of reminded me was, we didn't really talk about insect protein much. I know that used to be a kind of a funny, not funny, but common topic that we talked about in the past, and we talked about how potential applications, and there's a lot of interesting products that were in the marketplace direct for human consumption. I don't know what's your research currently saying now with respect to insect proteins, just so that way we cover that topic today.
Sure. Sure. So, insect proteins, they follow a much more near-term, commercially grounded growth curve. So this market is already scaled, already cost competitive in certain segments, and already, generating revenues, particularly in the animal feed, aquaculture, and pet nutrition. Um, Growth here is being driven less by breakthrough technology and more by sustainability mandates, feed security concerns, and regulatory acceptance. While
Yeah.
in the human food application, while the human food application is growing, they remain niche, and the bulk of the market expansion in the next 5 to 7 years will come from feed application and geographic expansion, especially in Europe and parts of Asia. Despite the growing demand, there are several major players in the insect protein market that have faced significant financial difficulties and
Yeah.
restructuring or outright collapse, highlighting challenges in the industry as it seeks commercial viability. So, for example, once regarded as the world's leading insect protein pioneer, Winesect, it has entered into judicial liquidation after failing to secure the funding needed to sustain its large-scale mealworm protein operation. So I think the most consistent and scalable expansion over the next decade is likely to come from fermentation-based proteins, where
Mhm.
economies and functionality and commercial readiness are aligning more rapidly than any other segment.
Yeah. All right. Looks like there's a
Yeah,
question for
yeah,
for both of us. Maybe I could take the first stab at it. Your data shows that the largest growth in absolute protein demand is coming from low and medium income countries. How does this
yeah,
change the way companies should think about alternative protein strategies? So yeah, I think we kind of hit on a few of those points. The So obviously, your growth opportunity, Aquila, on the hybrid solutions. So, obviously that's a nice bridge of introducing alternative proteins directly to, in human consumption applications and more blends. And maybe that was a strategy that plant-based proteins can also take as well. This is not just, I'm not talking about single cell proteins explicitly here. I don't think you were either, Aquila. I mean, this would be, whatever protein source you have, perhaps blending it and creating innovative products that are paired and complementary with animal based proteins as well, is a driver of how to get this product into those who wouldn't traditionally use these products. And even more so, in low and medium income countries, there is usually the big countries obviously there's a lot of population there, so it's not just a quality, but there's a lot of volume need. So it does help in terms of if you have limited supplies of dairy or meat in certain situations, that could be a plan for formulating blended solutions. So that is one way but I do say that in outside of the West, European markets or North American markets, I think the argument, the value proposition that this plant-based protein is going to be an effective meat-based substitute, I think that value proposition is increasingly weak. And we do see the evidence in that in retail sales. There are products that have been successfully commercialized despite it. I'm not saying that it's missing, but I don't know if that's going to work necessarily in other cultures where the demand for products to simulate to be a facsimile of meat is really low. And I think that's kind of the key learning of the industry over the last 5-10 years is that the target market for consumers of meat substitutes is really not been effectively developed yet. It's going to take some time, and it's more binary. It's either you want to eat plants or you want to eat animal. So how to educate all people, not just in low and medium income countries, would be position, you know, basically instead of calling it a plant-based protein, call it a legume, call it a real whole food, paired with a meat or a dairy product and for a new product. And then that is going to, people will adopt that value proposition a lot faster, especially outside the West or specifically in low and medium income countries. I think we
yeah.
have
I
time.
mean,
Yeah, go ahead, Akila. Yeah, what do you
yeah,
think?
yeah. I mean, yeah. I agree to this completely. I mean, for years, alternative protein strategies were built around a Western narrative, swapping burgers with plant-based analogs for climate-conscious consumers. But when you look at where the real demand is growing, it's the parts of South Asia, South Africa, and you know
Yeah.
the constraints and priorities are entirely different there. Yeah. Okay, so we
Ooh,
have
one
another
more
question
question.
coming. Yeah.
One more question. You want to ask?
Yeah. So at the start of the presentation, you framed protein systems being as being at an inflection point. So what specifically has changed, in the last few years that makes this momentum different from the previous alternative protein cycles?
And there's that, maybe this is actually a good conclusionary question too. Again,
Mhm.
to come full circle, we are at a junction or a threshold or whatever you want to call it, an inflection point, as the question said. A lot of it's outside, it's external to protein specifically, but because protein is such an essential nutrient, it does have a lot direct exposure to a lot of the big mega trends that we are observing in the world. Um, Resource constraints has a direct has a very direct impact on our ability to produce proteins. The impacts are felt strongest, and we can see them quickly among producers. Last year was a bad year for a lot of American producers. We know that. Um,
Yeah.
Animal protein producers, whether you're beef or soy, it was a tough. So again, but there's also positive trends that's changing the way that obviously populations are still going to grow. The demand for food is not going away. It's an essential nutrient. So there is going to be a requirement that's going to need organizations to help fill that possibly increasing gap. Because one thing we didn't show, and I know my colleague who manages our agriculture nutrition program is working on, it's the availability and quality of the soil to produce all the crops we need to feed everyone. That's complementary to this work we're doing. There, we can't make more land. We can try to clear more forest, but that will come at a cost. Maybe there'll be more arable land the more the ice caps melt, the farther north we go. But we have to feed people today, before the year 2050, not after 2050. And these are all real constraints that are being felt, and increasingly more felt, as we go into the future. So Frost Sullivan's on top of this. We're tracking not just the demand for these basic food products, but also the underlining trends, whether directly driving the growth of these markets or indirectly through, energy development trends or environmental trends or whatnot. It all links back to our ability to make the food we need. So very fascinating. And if you're interested out there in the ether world, please feel free to reach out to us and we'll be happy to carry on this conversation with you.